Today, I am taking the YouTube channel on the road. Stay tuned. So as I said, I am on the road, and as you can see from the license plate in front, I am in the state of Florida. This is where I've moved to. Coming down from the state of New York, and sorry about the camera shake because I'm trying to actually hold it, so I don't have it on a pedestal right now. But this is my old stomping grounds where I lived for 21 years, and I'll tell some more at the tail end of this video to give some more of a, more information regarding my trip here. Sorry, still have my mask on. Let me take that off so I can sound a little bit better. Sorry about that. In case you didn't hear what I said I lived here for 21 years here in the South Florida area before moving to New York. New York is a place where this last time I was up there, I lived in New York 3 times, and now Florida 2 times. So I've always loved it down here. When I moved from New York here back in 1987, I had no problems with I really had no problems with South Florida. I know some people may complain, but I never really had any issues. And one of the things I loved about being down here was the Caribbean community. And I watched it grow from, I wouldn't say it was non-existent, but I watched it grow from almost quite a few people to lots of Caribbean folks now. So just taking you on my little journey here. I'm going to go back through the last place where I lived when I was actually living down here. So just hang in there while I drive through. I'm going to try to not bore you guys with one long drive. So I'll try to snip this video up in pieces where I am at different locations. But just want to take you through my old neighborhood. So you can see me, my proud Caribbean heritage here. Just one second. That, me, being the U.S. Virgin Islands where I'm from, and my wife is from the beautiful country of Guyana. So that's who we're representing in this vehicle. I also would like to put one up for St. Kitts and Nevis, as that's where my roots are from. My mom and my father are from both of those islands respectively. My father being from St. Kitts, my mother being from Nevis. But just going through my old neighborhood here, and this is where I last lived, 12 years ago, when I was living here in South Florida. Now, what may come as a surprise is where you'll see that I used to live. So just hang in there. Pretty nice neighborhood, and believe it or not, there's a lot of Caribbean folks in this community. Once upon a time, this was predominantly a white community. As you can see now, it's well, you can't see it, but it's no longer that. It's more or less a middle-class neighborhood with a lot of black folks. You may have a handful of white people, but that is a house that I used to own and that I used to live in. So there it is. So just showing you. My neighbor, don't know where he's at today. I think he may have passed away by now. My old neighbor. But again, this is my old neighborhood. So this city is called Lauderhill. And as I said before, it used to be predominantly white, a lot of Jews who are still around. There's, believe it or not, a Jewish synagogue, yet all around it's just more or less black people living in the community. I'm still in the city of Lauderhill. Now I'm coming over more or less to what you would call the heart of the Caribbean community. Jamaicans will tell you it's the heart of the Jamaican community because the majority of Caribbean folks around here are Jamaicans. This happened to be a city where many Jamaicans settled over the years. So there is a large Jamaican population here. Many of them, I'm sure, voting for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris in the last election, being that Miss Harris has some connections to Jamaica. So again, this is the city of Lauderhill, and I'm pretty much going into or through the heart of it right now. Now, as a Virgin Islander, being from the U.S. Virgin Islands, it's nice to know that we have a restaurant that's owned by a Virgin Islander that is doing very well here in the city of Lauderhill, and it's located right in there. It's called Jones Kitchen. So I'm proud of that, because we've had a few ventures as Virgin Islanders that just never really took off. So hers has been successful. Now, this area has changed a lot over the years. I mean, of course, the place still looks rather familiar to me. And when I say change, I don't necessarily mean wholesale landscape changes. Still pretty much the same. But what I mean by changes is in the demographics and the people that you see, the people who are around here. I'll explain more of that at the tail end of the video as I continue driving through the heart of the Caribbean community here in Lauderhill, South Florida, in Broward County, which you may have heard about. For me, I would say this is where it all started when it came to the Caribbean community. This place has changed a lot, but this is known as the Lauderhill Mall. It never used to look like this 12 years ago, so this is a refurbishing of an old mall. When you go inside, it still looks the same, but the outside has definitely changed. By the way, this is where I voted, and where I voted for, in the presidential election, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. There's no way anyone would have gotten me to vote for Donald Trump. So if you're a Trump supporter and you're watching this channel and that upsets you, I am sorry, okay? Just not my choice. For those of you who don't know me, I've known of Donald Trump and about Donald Trump since about 1983, when I first moved to New York City. I shouldn't say the first time I moved to New York City, but when I moved back to New York. And I knew him for what he was way back when, and all these years later, he never changed. I didn't like him then, don't like him now. Anyway, enough of my politics. But this is what it looks like now, and this is where it pretty much all started for me. When it came to the Caribbean community, because when I moved here in 1987, I was not living down in this area, and I was living more or less in a predominantly white area further north of here. And I realized that there was nothing around that I was familiar with. Foods, people that look like me, and I wanted to find a place where people look like me, foods that I'm familiar with. Couldn't find any of that until I discovered this area, the Lauderhill Mall. And this part of the mall still looks somewhat the same, but when it came to foods and things I was familiar with, this was one of the very first places, or the first place I came to find foods that I was familiar with. The famous Charlie's Pastries. The owner, or the founder, has now since passed away. I think he has 2 stores, one here and one a little further up in the city of Tamarac. Jerk Machine is also here too, still. But these are places I used to hang out to buy foods like patties and... Yeah. Oh, that's my little son back there trying to get my attention. But yeah, this is where I used to hang out. This is where I used to come to buy foods. This is where I used to run into lots of, Jamaican singers and so forth. So this is where I used to camp out. I used to come down here to cut my hair across there. I'll explain a little bit more about that in the video. I don't know if the barbershop is still there. I doubt it is, or I doubt it may have the same people or the same owners that I remember. But this was where it used to be. So I'll explain a lot about, go into more details about this area. But again, over there, the barbershop. The bakery is still there, as a matter of fact. Hammond's is still there. And if I am not mistaken, I think this area over here was where Golden Crust may have started. I think it used to be in that. Oh, there it is over there. Right there. Golden Crust, right there. That yellow awning. I think that's where Golden Crust may have started out, or one of their earliest stores. And here's an interesting thing that I'm going to show. Let me show you, nothing is behind me. Over there, right over there in that corner, used to be a Trini restaurant. It was called Joy. And I remember during the carnival season down here in Miami, she would have a whole big shindig out in front of her establishment, which used to be right over there, more or less towards the entrance of the back entrance of the mall, or the southern entrance of the mall. Well, guess she's done well, because here she is now. Joy's Roti Delight. When I was here, this used to be a bank. And it's now no longer a bank. Now it's a Trini establishment. Joy's Rotis. Roti Delight, I should say. So she's come a long way. She's done well. She's succeeded. And Charlie's Pastries, which I showed a little bit earlier, he succeeded, even though he passed away some years back. But his establishment is still there. So it's nice to see an establishment that is still going right now. So it's fantastic to see this. And it's great to see these establishments here in Lauderhill, the Caribbean community, still succeeding. Again, this is the Lauderhill Mall. Pretty much where, and even though I am from the Virgin Islands, this is where I got my immersion into the Jamaican community, where I learned so much about Jamaica and Jamaicans. I eventually ended up marrying a Jamaican and going to Jamaica at least 20 times. So got really familiar with Jamaican culture, if you want to call it that, which of course is Caribbean culture. Lots of it I was already familiar with, just growing up in the Caribbean myself, in St. Kitts and in the Virgin Islands. But living around them, being around them every single day, living in this area, eventually buying a house in this area, I became what a lot of them say, an honorary Jamaican. So just stick with me. There'll be more in this video as I move on to the next location. So when I first moved here to South Florida, let me turn this radio down. When I first moved here to South Florida, this is the street I lived on, known as, I think it's Northwest 19th Street. I think it is. Again, this is deep into the heart of the Jamaican community. And I was living in this complex over here. This complex right over here. I forgot what it was called. I don't know if it's still called, I don't know if it was called Cypress Grove back then. Don't remember. But I used to live someplace in that building right there. That's my little son back there making this noise. But yeah, this is where I used to live. So this is the heart of the, again, I've been saying it for the longest while, the heart of the Jamaican community. I'm sure there's still a lot of Jamaicans living around here. I see a lot of Jamaican flags flying around like this in the vehicles. So spent a lot of time. I think I lived in here for about a year before I finally moved a little further north to the area that was predominantly white. But when I lived here, even though there were Jamaicans around me, I wasn't terribly familiar with them. So I never used to know where they hung out, where they used to go to eat foods and so forth. So I was still doing the McDonald's and Burger King type of thing, you know. But after a while, became more familiarized with the place. So this is a Caribbean community, but what would it be without mango trees, sapodilla trees like this one, or kneesberry, I think as Jamaicans call them. Don't know what kind of plant those are. But what would it be without stuff like that? And of course, coconut trees. an almond tree, and a pear tree or avocado tree. This video is a later addition to something I said in the video, or something I say at the end of the video actually. But just want to show you again, here in the Caribbean community, we have Golden Crust Restaurant on this corner. Across the street, there's Carl's Seafood, another Jamaican style restaurant. And over behind those trees in that corner over there is the Dutch Pot restaurant. And further down the street in the plaza down there, it's a little further down, there is Donna's, a Jamaican restaurant, and then there's Sybil's, a Guyanese restaurant. This is all around the intersection of Commercial Boulevard and University Drive. So again, just to show you Caribbean restaurants thriving here in the community. And as a matter of fact, over there, just behind this FedEx truck, over in the corner of this plaza, just one second, over in the corner of that plaza over there is a place that sells Haitian food. So just to go to show you. So hi there again, fans. I want to thank you for sticking around long enough to watch my little video of my trip out on the road there. Figured I'll go ahead and take the show on the road, so to speak. Now, as I mentioned in a previous video, in the video that I just made recently, the video on God that has been so controversial, which is a follow-up video, I mentioned that I moved from another state to this state. And as you can tell from the video, the state that I moved to is Florida. I've lived here before, and I've lived in this vicinity before for years, so this is not a surprising move to me, where I'm surprised or by anything that I see. I'm pretty much familiar with the area. But I just figured I would just go ahead and take it out on the road today, just so you guys can get a little bit of a view of the surroundings or the vicinity I live in. But of course, I chose to do this area. The areas that I showed today, I don't necessarily live in that area or in those areas, but I live close enough. So I just wanted to just touch on a few things that I did not state in the video, or that I said I was going to elaborate on. One of the first things that I forgot to do, I'm kicking myself right now, is not too far from here, at an intersection. There are plazas on three sides and a bank on the other side. On the three sides with plazas, believe it or not, there are Caribbean restaurants just there. And that again is a testimony of the growth of the Caribbean community and the contribution of the Caribbean community in this area. On one side of the street, you have the Dutch Pot. On one side of the street, you have the Dutch Pot restaurant. That's primarily Jamaican. Diagonally across the street in the other plaza, you have Golden Crust, another primarily Jamaican restaurant. Then across the street, there is Carl's Seafood, primarily a Jamaican restaurant. A little further down the street from that intersection, I want to say just steps further down, you have Donna's restaurant, which is also primarily Jamaican. About an intersection further down, there is Sybil's restaurant, primarily Guyanese. The original Sybil's restaurant is in New York, in Queens. And Guyanese and Trini people can tell you all about those restaurants. But they're literally a mile down the street from me. They're all there. When I left here 12 years ago to move to New York City, none of those restaurants were in that intersection in that area. None of those restaurants were there as far as I know. But it just goes again to show you the testimony of the growth of the Caribbean community and their contributions. But one of the interesting things that's also going on since I left and I came back is that
There is an emerging Haitian community here in Broward County, um, in this area. There's a restaurant across the street. I don't know if it's an actual I don't know if it's a Haitian restaurant, but there in that same vicinity. But there is a sign saying serving Haitian food here. So I'm assuming it's a Haitian restaurant. I did not go in there. Up the street, there's a laundromat that I used to go to pretty often before I had bought a house. It's a laundromat up the street. So I went to a nearby establishment to look at something, and happened to go into the laundromat to ask them a question. When I went inside there, it's run, it's operated by Haitians right now. You know, it looks like it's owned by them also. And I've been noticing that when I go to the local Walmarts around, I'm hearing, because I know the accent, I am hearing and seeing more Haitian people. That is just interesting to me because when we talk about the Caribbean community in this vicinity, it was primarily dominated by Jamaicans, and still is. It's still pretty much when you talk about Caribbean folks in this area, it's mostly Jamaicans. But now you're seeing an emergent Haitian population. You drive around, you see flags in cars, you see flags of Saint Vincent. I saw one the other day. You have a lot of Trinidadians around here also. I haven't seen many Guyanese flags, but I'm sure they're around. Of course, you saw one in my vehicle because my wife is Guyanese. Um, so it's interesting, again, to see the diversity of the Caribbean population here in the area. There are Virgin Islanders. When I lived here, there were Virgin Islanders here. And I'm going to get back to that in a minute. The other thing that I wanted to point out is the fact that now I'm seeing a lot of Dominicans in the area from the Dominican Republic. I am seeing a lot of them. I'm hearing them because, again, from living in New York City, I pretty much picked up some of their Spanish and the way that they speak it. You have Dominicans around. And further north in this county, when I was leaving from here, like up in the Deerfield Beach area, you're having a lot of Brazilians up there right now. And not to say they're part of the Caribbean per se, but you know, so you have a lot of them up there. So this is quite interesting. Just to see the diversity and the changes that has taken place within 12 years since I was last here, living here. Now, going back to what I was going to say, I moved down here in 1987 from New York City to live. So way back when. When I came down here, I was living, as I mentioned in one of the videos where I was going around, I did live in a black community. I didn't pay much attention to my surroundings to realize that many of the people around me were, come to think of it, I don't think many of them were Jamaicans at the time. There were a lot of African Americans in the community, and over time it changed. But by the time it started changing, I had already moved out and moved a little further north in the county in Broward County, to where it was more or less a predominantly white neighborhood. Yeah, there's some mixtures, but it was predominantly white. I just happened to be living in that vicinity. I mean, I did have a decent job at the time, was doing pretty well for myself as a single bachelor. So I did go where my money could afford, nice neighborhood and so forth, because the neighborhood where I was living in Lauderhill prior to that, a little iffy. So I remember when I left home one day to try to go get a haircut. Because I think back then, I don't think I was much into cutting my hair. I think I was still rocking somewhat of an afro type of thing. So I decided to go out venturing to look for a place to cut my hair. So I go driving, not familiar with the area at all, just driving, trying to see if I see a black neighborhood. And I got to an area over in a city that borders Lauderhill, known as Sunrise. I don't remember where specifically it was, but I remember I saw a barber, and I got out of the car and I went inside. By the time I got to the door, the barber was cutting someone's hair. There was only one barber in there. He was cutting someone's hair, and he just looked and he saw me and he said, we don't cut hair like that in here. I was like, okay. Didn't quite know what that meant back then. I mean, I was still young, naive. I think I was, what, 19, 20, somewhere around there. I don't remember. So I was still naive to certain words and how they're used in certain ways, or and they may be an expression of racism. I just didn't understand all of that. I was still naive coming from the Caribbean, not understanding what racism was all about. Now, I'm not saying when he said that he meant it in a racist way, but that he was dishonest. We don't cut hair like that in here. I was like, okay. So I remember I jumped into the vehicle and I went driving, just driving around, looking, and I started to notice as I drove more, I started to notice the neighborhood becoming a little bit more colored, becoming a little bit more black. And that's when I ended up over in the area near Charlie's Pastries. No, that's not where I ended up. I ended up further back up. If you watch the video, in the same plaza where I talked about a Virgin Islands restaurant, in that same plaza, I saw a barber, and I think I saw the barber walking into his shop, and I was like, "Oh, he's black. Let me go in there and check him out." I go in. He happened to be Jamaican. Started cutting my hair, and I want to say for about 2 years I was going in there to that guy. Incidentally, he died from AIDS. And after that happened, that's when I kind of, by that time, I started getting a little familiar with the community and everything. And I started to notice that there were a little bit more Jamaicans in the community, but still a lot of African Americans. Now, where the game changer was in 1992. Remember, I moved down in 1987. And I think the game changer was 1992, if I remember correctly. That was when Hurricane Andrew came through South Florida, pretty much doing some serious damage to South Dade County, which is down there where Miami is at, and further south. When that took place, a lot of Jamaicans who were living in Miami, in the Miami area, fled to Broward County. So as they started coming over into Broward County, coming over, you start to see the Jamaican population increasing, and you start to see the influence of the Jamaicans in the community. You start seeing barbershops owned by Jamaicans. You start seeing more restaurants owned by Jamaicans. You start seeing more Jamaicans buying homes because a lot of them took that insurance money and came up this way and started to buy homes. You start to hear a lot more reggae music. You start hearing a lot more of the Jamaican talk in the communities and so forth. Now, me now being from the Virgin Islands, I didn't really know many other Virgin Islanders living down here. For a minute there, I thought I was the only one. But eventually, over time, as I started branching out and moving out, and I was a basketball junkie back in those days, and then through networks, I would hear one Virgin Islander saying that I would meet or I would know from back home, and it would be like, yeah, I live in Florida, and this is where we play ball, and this. And I started going out there and coming around my people, and we started playing basketball. So I started finding more and more Virgin Islanders. Mixed in with the Virgin Islanders, you would have a few Jamaicans. There would be a few people from St. Kitts, a few people from Nevis, some Antiguans here and there. And that's how I started to get familiar with the Caribbean community here in the area. But again, the area was and still is dominated by Jamaicans, so I was around them more often. I eventually married one of them, and I got to know Jamaica and Jamaicans very well because I used to start traveling to Jamaica a little bit more often. I think when everything was said and done, I had traveled to Jamaica about 20 times. So going back out and seeing the neighborhood and seeing my old haunts, my old stomping grounds was really, really refreshing to see. So now a lot of Jamaicans have left, and a lot of Caribbean people have left from this area and have moved either to other states, like other cities, like Atlanta, but a lot of them have moved to other parts of Florida, further up along the East Coast. I want to say, like in cities like Port St. Lucie, you will find like a huge Jamaican population up there because up there, it's about an hour and a half from here. Um, property's still cheaper than down here. Um, I guess it's a little bit, in terms of property, it's cheaper up there. So a lot of people fled up there, even though I'm sure the house prices have moved up from where they used to be when I first moved down here. I'm sorry. I remember in Port St. Lucie, you can find property for next to nothing. Um, I shouldn't say next to nothing, but what you'd have paid $150,000 down here for, you were paying $50,000 up there for. Of course, that has changed, but a lot of Jamaicans eventually moved up there because a lot of those Jamaicans had bought land and property there while still living in places like New York City. And they eventually moved down to claim their property, build their homes, and now that's where they live. So I just want to just take it out on the road to show you guys what it looks like. Again, I moved down here. I know there was a hiatus in me making videos, but that was because I was making this transition down here to the state. I'm happy to be back. I really love it down here. I prefer it than up north in New York City. It is the climate that I'm familiar with. I see a lot of things that I'm familiar with, the fruit trees, of course, the climate. I go down to the beach even though I don't go into the water because there's no beach here in the United States that can rival those that we have in the Caribbean, unless I go to Key West probably here in Florida, but that's 3.5 hours south of here. So I feel much more comfortable, feel much more relaxed. I have a better background to do my videos, quite a few backgrounds. Eventually I'll do one out there on the porch or outside on the golf course or something like that. But for right now, this is just great. But I just want to take you guys out there to show you guys where I used to live, where I used to hang out, how it was when I first got here. And one other thing I want to go ahead and mention. So I'm going to, okay, it's about 15 minutes into this video already, but I'm going to mention one other thing. And I mentioned it in one of my other videos that I got all torn up, ripped about, because it seems like I was talking bad about Jamaicans when I really was not. But I also want to mention that with the Jamaicans that came over here from Miami, what transpired back then was that in 1980, Jamaicans had that really bloody election. And when that happened, there were rival gangs who used the election as a cover to do what they want to do with one another. Rival gangs in the Kingston area. And a lot of these gang members kind of like escaped Jamaica and ran over here to the Miami area, bringing with them their way of life. And also, their enemies tracked them over here, and it led to a lot of violence within the Jamaican community. Obviously, not all Jamaicans were involved. As a matter of fact, the majority of Jamaicans were just not involved with that kind of life. But you had those bad apples in the bunch who brought a bad name to the Jamaican community. So a lot of them fled over here. But before they came over, there was another wave of Jamaicans that came over prior to them. And those were the rich, well-to-do, educated Jamaicans that came over prior to them. And those are the Jamaicans that came over because they believed that Jamaica was going to turn into a communist nation. And they decided to flee because they figured communism means that the government is going to come and take my money, the government is going to come and take my land, so let me take my money and get on out. There's a famous statement that was made by Michael Manley, the prime minister at the time, who, when these people had their frustrations and their fears, he said, listen, man, there are 5 flights, direct flights to Miami from out of Jamaica. Take one of them and get out of here, basically, is what he said to them. So a lot of them took him up on that word, and they just bolted, and they came over. So that wave came over. They tended to assimilate much better. They tended to blend in much better because a lot of them had the money to move into some nice neighborhoods. A lot of them, because they were educated, their kids were able to go to the finest schools. These people were doctors, they were lawyers, so they just blended in really well in the professional community. The other group of Jamaicans that came in afterwards tend to have been lesser educated, came from the rough areas of Kingston, tend to be a little bit more, and when I use this word, I'm not trying to say all Jamaicans are this way, but they tend to be a little bit more aggressive, a little bit more out there. They wore their Jamaicanness out in their sleeves. They would let you know that they are Jamaicans. And funny enough, those are the ones who basically are the ones who pushed the image of Jamaica, who put Jamaica on the map, so to speak. Because the other Jamaicans who came over were pretty much more reserved, just blended in. You know, they weren't going to be blasting reggae music in their backyard. I had a jerk pan back there and so forth. This other group of Jamaicans, they came over, bad, good, or indifferent. They did put Jamaica on the map. And they did push the Jamaican culture out there for what it is today that everyone pretty much knows about Jamaica. Loving Jamaican food, loving reggae, just loving the whole Jamaican culture and everything. So I just wanted to make that distinction between the two groups. And sometimes there was friction between the two groups because the group that came over first were a little bit more reserved, a little bit more laid back. They thought that the second group of Jamaicans that come over were noisy, loud, rambunctious, giving a bad name to Jamaicans because some of them were involved in criminal activities and so forth. But right now, I think that kind of all balanced out. And I think we pretty much can look back in history now and realize, and we can put it together into some kind of perspective. Just wanted to mention that. So right now, I'm happy to be back in this area. I'm happy to be back around my people. Not to say like that was not the case in New York, but where I lived in New York City, I wasn't in Brooklyn, where I could say that I was around a lot of Caribbean people. Yes, I was, but in the area that I live was primarily Guyanese folks. But so being back down here and just feeling like I'm in the Caribbean is just a great feeling. So I just want to thank you guys for looking at the video, and try to keep up and do a few more videos along the way. Again, I have a 3-year-old that I have to take care of down here, so it's a little difficult getting around to videos. But I want to thank you guys for watching all the way through. Thank you for going on the road with me today. And until I do the next video, you guys take care. And I thank you for signing up, for viewing this video. You can subscribe, you can let your friends know, you can put this video out there on your pages, your Facebook pages and so forth. And hopefully you can have your friends also go ahead and subscribe, okay? Like the video. You can dislike it if you want to also, but I prefer the likes, all right? You guys take care. Until the next time, we'll talk.